The laughter began before Elena Whitmore reached the ballroom stairs, soft at first, then sharper, then impossible to ignore. She stopped beneath the crystal chandeliers, while dozens of aristocrats pretended not to stare at her ruined sleeve. Wine stained the pale blue silk from her wrist to her elbow. A servant had collided with her moments earlier, or perhaps not accidentally at all. Elena lowered her eyes calmly, though heat climbed into her face. Across the ballroom, whispers moved like wind through dry leaves. Poor thing, she should not have come. They say the Duke invited her once. No, he barely knows her. That last sentence hurt most because it was true, or at least it had become true. At the far end of the room stood Duke Adrian Ravenshire beside the Queen's advisor, dressed in black evening attire that made him appear carved from shadow itself. Tall, controlled, untouchable, he looked toward Elena only once, only briefly. But in that single glance, she saw recognition, and worse than recognition, hesitation. For 3 years she had loved him quietly, not foolishly, not like a girl dreaming over poetry. She had loved him through silence, through winter visits to the Veterans Hospital, where she volunteered reading letters aloud to wounded soldiers, through rainy afternoons when Adrian arrived without title or ceremony to deliver funds anonymously, through conversations spoken softly beside dim fireplaces while injured men slept nearby. That was where she had known him, not as a duke, but as a man who carried loneliness like a wound beneath his ribs. And now he looked at her as though even remembering her might cost him something. Lady Beatrice Holloway approached with a graceful smile sharpened by cruelty. "Dear Miss Whitmore," she said softly, "you seem distressed. London can be terribly unkind to unfamiliar faces." Elena forced herself to remain composed. "I shall survive it. Oh, I am certain." Beatrice's eyes flicked toward Adrian, though perhaps not all associations survive equally well. Meaning landed clearly. Elena's chest tightened. Months earlier, gossip had begun spreading through London society. Rumors that Elena had charmed wealthy noblemen into funding her family's struggling estate. Rumors that she entertained private meetings with aristocrats beneath respectable appearances. No names had ever been spoken aloud, but everyone knew whose name hovered unspoken beneath the rumors: Adrian Ravenshire. Elena had believed he would deny the accusations eventually, not because he loved her, but because he respected her. Tonight would prove how wrong she had been. The Queen's advisor suddenly addressed Adrian loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Your Grace, I believe Miss Whitmore is acquainted with your charitable affairs." The ballroom quieted. Elena's pulse stumbled. Adrian remained perfectly still, then he answered calmly. "I have encountered Miss Whitmore on several public occasions, nothing more, nothing more." The words struck harder than humiliation itself, not because they were cruel, because they were careful, cold, measured, designed to erase her gently before witnesses. Elena felt every eye in the room shift toward her, some sympathetic, most entertained. She managed a small nod. "Of course, Your Grace." Her voice nearly broke on the final word. Music resumed moments later, yet the ballroom no longer felt real. Only distant sounds and blurred faces remained around her. Adrian did not approach her again. He continued speaking with ministers while Elena stood alone beside the towering windows, watching snow fall beyond the glass. For the first time in years, something inside her quietly began to close. And across the room, Adrian looked toward her again, this time with unmistakable regret. But he still did not move. By the time he finally crossed the ballroom searching for her, Elena Whitmore was already gone. Rain struck the carriage roof steadily as Elena returned to her aunt's townhouse after midnight. She sat in silence with her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. Only when the carriage stopped did she finally allow herself to cry. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, the kind of tears born from humiliation too deep for anger. Her aunt, Margaret Whitmore, opened the door before the servants could. "Oh, Elena," she stepped inside quickly, removing her damp gloves. "I am tired, Aunt," stuttered her face carefully. "He said nothing." Elena gave a faint smile that hurt more than tears. "He said exactly enough." Older woman sighed softly. Margaret had warned her for months. Men like Adrian Ravenshire belonged to a world governed by reputation above affection. A duke could admire kindness privately, yet destroy it publicly if cornered by society. Still, Elena had believed Adrian different. That was her mistake. The following morning London papers carried fresh gossip. The Duke of Ravenshire distances himself from persistent social speculation. No names mentioned, no accusations directly spoken. But everyone understood. Invitations stopped arriving soon after. Ladies who once greeted Elena warmly now turned away at gatherings. Gentlemen became overly polite in the uncomfortable way men behaved around women touched by scandal. Weeks passed, then months. Winter deepened across London. And Elena slowly changed, not outwardly at first. She still attended small dinners, still smiled when necessary, but something inside her quieted. She stopped waiting for letters that never arrived, stopped searching crowded rooms for Adrian's face, stopped imagining explanations for his silence. One snowy afternoon, she returned to the Veterans Hospital for the first time since the ball. The familiar scent of coal smoke and medicine wrapped around her immediately. Captain Henry Ellis smiled warmly upon seeing her. "Miss Whitmore, they have missed you terribly." "Them." She moved between beds reading newspapers aloud to recovering soldiers. She finally felt useful again. Calm again, no whispers, no ballroom cruelty, only wounded men grateful for kindness. Then the doors opened. The entire room shifted subtly. Adrian Ravenshire entered beside his physician, removing dark leather gloves slowly as snow melted against his coat. Elena's breath caught before she could stop it. He looked thinner, more retired. The old war injury in his shoulder had apparently worsened again. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Adrian crossed the room toward her. "Miss Whitmore." His voice remained controlled, though rougher than she remembered. "Your Grace." The distance between those two greetings felt enormous. Adrian glanced toward the soldiers nearby. "You stopped coming." Stretched, finally he said quietly, "The rumors became unpleasant." Elena met his eyes then, and yet somehow they survived. A flicker of pain crossed his expression, brief, controlled, gone again. "You think I abandoned you?" "You did." Her answer came gently, that seemed to wound him more. Adrian lowered his voice further. "You do not understand the political circumstances surrounding—" "No," Elena interrupted softly. "I understand them perfectly now." The words settled heavily between them. For the first time Adrian seemed uncertain, almost vulnerable, but before he could answer, another voice interrupted. "Miss Whitmore." A tall gentleman approached carrying medical ledgers beneath one arm, Professor Nathaniel Harrow, a scholar recently appointed to oversee educational funding for injured veterans, warm-eyed. Thoughtful, quietly confident, Elena visibly softened upon seeing him. "Professor Harrow." Adrian noticed immediately. Nathaniel smiled kindly. "The men were asking whether you might continue the reading lessons through spring." "I should like that very much." Something dark flickered behind Adrian's calm expression, not anger, something colder, jealousy. Nathaniel turned politely toward the Duke. "Your Grace." Adrian nodded once, but his attention remained fixed on Elena, and for the first time since knowing her. He realized another man might someday become the center of her life. The thought followed him long after he left the hospital that evening, and disturbed him far more than it should have. By early spring, Elena Whitmore no longer felt like the same woman who had stood humiliated beneath ballroom chandeliers. Something inside her had steadied. She spent mornings teaching injured soldiers to read and evenings assisting Professor Harrow with educational programs funded quietly through universities. Nathaniel treated her with effortless respect, not admiration designed to impress, not careful politeness shaped by society, simply respect. And after months of emotional exhaustion, that simple kindness felt dangerous in its own way. One afternoon, while reviewing lesson papers beside the hospital library fire, Nathaniel spoke gently. "You seem happier here than in London society." Elena smiled faintly. "Society requires performance. This place requires honesty." "Which do you prefer?" She looked into the fire thoughtfully. "I believe I am learning that now." Nathaniel watched her quietly. Unlike other men, he never pressed for more, never demanded smiles, never tried to rescue her sadness. Perhaps that was why she trusted him. Across London, meanwhile, Adrian Ravenshire found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts he could neither control nor silence. At formal dinners, he searched rooms instinctively for Elena before remembering she no longer attended. At political meetings, small details returned unexpectedly. The way she listened carefully before speaking, the softness in her voice while reading to wounded men, the quiet disappointment in her eyes that final night at the ballroom. Regret settled into him slowly, like winter frost spreading beneath stone. One evening, Adrian attended a royal musicale hosted by Lady Holloway. He arrived late, and froze almost immediately. Elena stood near the grand piano in a silver gown, speaking with Nathaniel Harrow beneath candlelight. She looked different, not brighter exactly, but freer. There was calmness in her now that had not existed before. She no longer searched the room nervously for approval, no longer carried silent hope in her eyes, and Adrian hated realizing he missed that hope because he had been the one to destroy it. As music filled the ballroom, Lady Beatrice approached Adrian knowingly. "She seems recovered rather quickly." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I do not concern myself with Miss Whitmore's personal affairs." "Really?" Beatrice smiled faintly. "Then why have you spent the last 5 minutes staring at her?" He said nothing, because he had no answer that would protect him. Later that evening, Elena stepped onto the moonlit terrace for air. Cold spring wind moved softly through the gardens below. Moments later, Adrian followed. She heard his footsteps before he spoke. "You should not stand outside without a shawl." almost smiled at the familiar protectiveness hidden beneath his cold tone. I have survived winter before, Your Grace. Stopped beside her, too close, not close enough. For several moments neither spoke. Then Adrian said quietly, You seem well. I am. You spend considerable time with Professor Harrow. The jealousy beneath the statement remained carefully restrained. Elena noticed Yes, he is fond of you. She turned toward him slowly. Does that trouble you? Adrian met her gaze, and for one dangerous second honesty nearly escaped him. Yes, the word remained trapped behind his silence. Instead he answered coldly, I merely hope you exercise caution. Something inside Elena hardened gently, not anger, acceptance. You forfeited the right to caution me about my heart. The sentence struck him visibly. Adrian stepped closer. I never intended to hurt you. No, she whispered. That is what made it worse. Wind moved between them. Music echoed faintly from inside the ballroom. Adrian looked at her then with an intensity that unsettled even himself, as though realizing too late how deeply she had entered his life. I thought distance would protect you. Elena's eyes glistened softly. Who protected me from the distance? He had no answer. For the first time in years, Adrian Ravenshire felt utterly powerless, and when Nathaniel appeared moments later, offering Elena his coat against the cold, Adrian experienced something far more frightening than regret. He experienced fear that another man was slowly becoming the place Elena felt safest. Summer arrived with endless garden parties and endless gossip, but society had changed its attention now, not toward scandal, toward courtship. Professor Nathaniel Harrow had begun escorting Elena publicly, never possessively, never arrogantly. Yet their growing closeness became impossible to ignore. Women whispered about how gently he looked at her. Men remarked upon how Elena laughed more easily beside him, and every rumor somehow reached Adrian Ravenshire. Each one settled beneath his skin like poison. One evening, during a royal charity banquet, Adrian watched from across the ballroom as Nathaniel adjusted Elena's glove with quiet tenderness. The gesture itself meant nothing, yet Adrian's chest tightened so sharply he nearly left the room. Instead he drank 2 glasses of whiskey in dangerous silence. Lord Ashcombe eventually approached him carefully. You look prepared to duel someone. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. Do I? Ashcombe followed his gaze toward Elena and Nathaniel. Adrian said nothing. His friend lowered his voice. You should have claimed her when you had the chance. The words struck harder than intended, because Adrian suddenly realized he had never truly believed he could lose her. Elena had always been there, quietly loving him, quietly understanding him, waiting without demanding. And now she was slowly stepping beyond his reach. That realization became unbearable. Later that evening, Elena wandered briefly into the library, seeking quiet from the crowded ballroom. She froze upon finding Adrian already there beside the fireplace. His cravat loosened slightly, one hand braced against the mantel. He looked tired again, emotionally tired. You avoid me, he said quietly. Elena closed the door behind her. I try not to create discomfort. Never created discomfort. A bitter smile touched her lips. Then perhaps humiliation. Adrian's eyes darkened. I deserve that. Admission surprised her. He continued after a long silence. I told myself sacrificing your opinion of me was necessary. For politics, for survival. Elena studied him carefully. For the first time she saw genuine exhaustion beneath his composed exterior. You are afraid of something, she said softly. Adrian looked away. That alone was answer enough. Finally he spoke. Father destroyed this family through scandal before his death. My mother spent years begging society for mercy it never gave. His voice lowered further. I swore I would never allow another woman to suffer beside me because of my name. Elena's anger softened painfully, because now she understood, not fully, but enough. You thought abandoning me would save me. Yes, did it? His silence broke her heart more than excuses could have. At that moment, ballroom doors opened suddenly behind them. Several guests entered laughing loudly before stopping at the sight of them alone together. The silence that followed felt immediate and dangerous. Elena stepped away instinctively. Adrian noticed, and something inside him cracked quietly, because she no longer trusted remaining beside him publicly, not after what he had done. The guests exchanged knowing glances before leaving again, the damage already done. Elena exhaled slowly. It seems society remains determined to continue our history for us. Adrian stepped toward her suddenly, emotion breaking through restraint for the first time. I am tired of society. Honesty in his voice startled her. I cannot endure watching another man become your future. Stared at him silently, his jaw tightened as though the confession itself humiliated him. You should not say such things unless you mean them. I mean every word. For one suspended moment, years of restraint nearly collapsed between them. Then Elena whispered softly, you realized too late. She walked away before he could stop her. leaving Adrian alone beside the dying fire with the terrifying understanding that she might truly be slipping beyond him forever. 3 weeks later, London awoke to shocking news. Professor Nathaniel Harrow had proposed marriage, and Elena Whitmore had accepted. The announcement spread through aristocratic circles before noon. By evening, Adrian Ravenshire had shattered a crystal glass against his study wall. The servants pretended not to hear. Rain battered the estate windows while Adrian stood motionless beside the fireplace, breathing unevenly, engaged. The word echoed relentlessly. He had imagined jealousy before. This was something far worse. Loss real, immediate, unavoidable. For the first time in years, Adrian abandoned his carefully controlled routines entirely. He stopped attending dinners, ignored invitations, spent sleepless nights packing dark corridors while memories of Elena haunted every silence, her voice reading softly beside hospital beds, her smile when she forgot herself, the way she once looked at him as though he were better than he truly was, and now another man would receive that devotion. Another man would hear her laugh in the mornings, protect her, comfort her, love her openly. Adrian could barely breathe beneath the thought. Meanwhile, Elena tried desperately to quiet the storm inside herself. Nathaniel was kind, steady, safe. When he proposed beneath blooming summer roses, he had not demanded passion, only honesty. "I know your heart has suffered," he told her gently, "but I believe peace can grow where pain once lived." Elena wanted peace, more than longing, more than uncertainty. So she accepted, yet at night, she still remembered Adrian's voice in the library. "I cannot endure watching another man become your future." The memory weakened her in ways she hated. Several days before the engagement celebration, Elena visited her childhood home briefly to retrieve old belongings before the property's sale. Rain fell steadily as she sorted through forgotten trunks in the attic. There she found a small wooden box she had not opened in years. Inside rested old hospital receipts, medical invoices, and one missing item, her mother's wedding ring. Elena closed the box quietly. Memories returned immediately. Years earlier, after Adrian's war injury, treatment costs had quietly overwhelmed even ducal finances due to political debts his late father left behind. Adrian never knew, but Elena had sold the ring anonymously to help fund the specialist who saved his shoulder from permanent damage. She had never intended him to know. Love had once made sacrifice feel simple. Now the memory only hurt. Downstairs, carriage wheels suddenly sounded outside. Elena frowned slightly. Moments later, the servant entered nervously. "Your Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire has arrived." Her pulse stumbled. Adrian entered soaked from rain, dark hair damp against his forehead. He looked exhausted, almost desperate. For several seconds neither spoke. Then his eyes found the wooden box in her hands. "What is that?" "Nothing important." Adrian noticed the old medical seals immediately. Recognition slowly crossed his face. He stepped closer. "These are from my treatment after the war." Elena went still. Too late. Adrian opened the papers carefully. Then he saw the payment signatures, anonymous donations. His breathing changed. "This was you?" Silence answered him. Adrian looked up slowly, stunned. "You sold something," Elena said quietly. "It does not matter now." "Did you sell?" When she did not answer, realization struck him anyway. His expression shattered completely. "Your mother's ring," filled Elena's eyes instantly, not because he discovered the truth, because she no longer wished he had. Adrian stared at her as though seeing her fully for the first time. "You saved my arm. You needed treatment. You never told me. You never needed to know." Emotion overwhelmed the careful control he had maintained his entire life. Adrian stepped toward her slowly. "While I stood protecting my reputation. You were sacrificing pieces of your life for mine." Elena's voice trembled. "I loved you once." Once, that single word nearly destroyed him, because it carried something far more terrifying than anger. It carried the possibility that her love was ending, and Adrian Ravenshire finally understood that losing her would not merely break his heart, it would empty his entire life. After discovering the truth about the ring, Adrian changed in ways London society quickly noticed. He became reckless, not scandalously. Emotionally, he attended gatherings only if Elena would be present, interrupted conversations simply to speak with her briefly, watched her constantly from crowded rooms with quiet desperation he no longer concealed well. The Tun began whispering again, but differently now. "The Duke looks ill whenever she leaves. He cannot hide it anymore. Perhaps he truly loves her." Unfortunately, Elena heard those whispers too, and they frightened her, because part of her still loved him enough to hope. Nathaniel noticed the conflict growing behind her calm smiles. One evening after a concert, he walked beside her through lantern-lit gardens. "You are unhappy," he said gently. Elena immediately shook her head. "No, you do not lie well." She stopped walking. Nathaniel looked at her kindly, not accusingly, simply sad. "You still love him?" Filled her eyes before she could answer. Nathaniel exhaled softly and looked toward the dark gardens. "I feared that from the beginning." I tried not to. I know. Tenderness in his voice only deepened her guilt. Nathaniel turned back toward her after a long silence. Does he love you? Elena whispered honestly. I think he only realized it after losing me. What do you feel now? That question hurt most, because she no longer knew Adrian had wounded her deeply, yet every vulnerable glance from him reopened emotions she fought desperately to bury. Nathaniel gently took her hand. You deserve certainty, Elena, not confusion. She nearly cried then, not because she wished to leave Nathaniel, because he deserved better than half a heart. Across the ballroom windows behind them, Adrian watched the scene unfold, and for the first time in his life, jealousy became unbearable, not the arrogant jealousy of possession, the terrified jealousy of a man watching another person offer the tenderness he should have given himself. Later that night, heavy rain forced guests to remain temporarily inside the estate. Elena stepped into an empty corridor seeking air. Moments later Adrian followed. I saw you with him. His voice sounded rough. She turned slowly. You were watching. I always watch you. The confession hung heavily between them. Rain thundered against distant windows. Adrian moved closer. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. No, Elena whispered painfully. You do not. Accepted the words without resistance. That does not change what I feel. Emotion flickered visibly beneath his restraint now, raw. Frighteningly honest. I wake thinking of you. I search every room for you. I hear your voice in silence. His breathing unevened slightly. And every time you look at him the way you once looked at me, I feel as though I am losing something vital to my existence. Elena's eyes filled instantly, because Adrian never spoke emotionally, not like this, never. He continued quietly. I was raised believing love made men weak, vulnerable, foolish. His gaze locked onto hers. Then you stopped loving me openly, and I discovered weakness anyway. A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. Adrian's expression softened painfully at the sight. Instinctively he reached toward her face, then stopped himself midway. Even now he feared hurting her further. That hesitation broke something inside Elena, because for the first time his restraint came not from pride but from tenderness. I do not know how to trust you again, she whispered. Adrian answered honestly. I know. Surrounded them, heavy, intimate. Then distant ballroom doors opened, voices approached. Elena stepped back immediately, and Adrian saw it again. The fear of public humiliation he had placed inside her. Regret crushed him silently as she disappeared back into the crowd, leaving him alone with the understanding that love alone might no longer be enough. The Royal Autumn Ball became the most anticipated event of the season, not because of politics, because society expected spectacle. By then nearly everyone sensed the emotional war unfolding between Elena Whitmore, Professor Harrow, and the Duke of Ravenshire. The ballroom glittered beneath golden chandeliers, while musicians played waltzes that sounded almost mournful. Elena arrived wearing deep emerald silk. The entire room seemed to pause. Adrian, standing near the staircase, forgot entirely how to breathe. She looked beautiful, not delicate, strong. There was quiet confidence in her now that made her even harder to reach. Nathaniel escorted her with calm dignity, yet even he seemed emotionally distant tonight. As dancing began, whispers spread rapidly through the ballroom. Then came the cruelty. Lady Beatrice Holloway approached a circle of nobles loudly enough to be overheard. Touching, she remarked. A scholar willing to marry a woman once discarded by a duke. The conversation nearby quieted instantly. Elena froze, old humiliation rushed back painfully. Before she could respond, Adrian crossed the ballroom, fast, dangerously fast. The room fell silent as he stopped directly beside Elena. His voice emerged cold enough to cut glass. You will apologize immediately. Beatrice blinked in shock. Grace, I merely repeated what society has long discussed. No, Adrian said quietly. Society repeated what cowards invented. Ballroom watched breathlessly. Beatrice recovered slightly. Surely you do not intend to defend? I intend, Adrian interrupted, to correct every lie ever spoken about Miss Whitmore. Exploded across the room. Elena stared at him, stunned. Adrian turned slowly toward the gathered aristocrats. For years, this woman has shown more integrity, intelligence, and kindness than most people in this room combined. His voice grew rougher, and while society questioned her character, she was quietly sacrificing her own happiness to help wounded soldiers, struggling families, and even men who never deserved her loyalty. Whispers spread instantly. Nathaniel looked toward Elena with growing realization. Adrian continued, unable to stop now. When I returned injured from war, it was Elena Whitmore who secretly funded my treatment after selling her late mother's wedding ring. His composure finally cracked. She protected my dignity while I failed to protect hers. Shock rippled through the ballroom. Several women lowered their eyes immediately in shame. Elena stood frozen. Adrian turned toward her fully now. Nothing guarded remained in him anymore. I loved you long before I understood what love was, he said quietly before everyone. And I destroyed the best thing ever placed in my life because I feared weakness more than loneliness. Emotion thickened his voice, but losing you taught me there are things far worse than weakness. The ballroom remained utterly silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Adrian stepped closer carefully, not demanding, not commanding, simply vulnerable. If there remains even the smallest place for me in your heart, I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve it. Blurred Elena's vision. For years she had imagined hearing those words, yet now that they finally came, they carried sorrow as much as hope. She looked toward Nathaniel, gentle, kind Nathaniel. He offered her a faint, sad smile, then quietly bowed his head. And in that graceful moment, Elena understood he had already let her go, not because Adrian was a duke, because Nathaniel loved her enough to recognize where her heart still lived. Emotion overwhelmed her completely then. She turned back toward Adrian. The man who once abandoned her before society, the man now standing vulnerable before that same society for her sake. And slowly, Elena stepped toward him. Winter returned softly to London. Snow drifted beyond palace windows while candlelight warmed the grand halls once more, but everything had changed. This time, when Elena entered a ballroom beside Adrian Ravenshire, no whispers followed her, no humiliation waited beneath polite smiles. Instead, society watched the Duke with fascination. Because Adrian no longer resembled the cold, untouchable aristocrat they once feared. Love had softened him visibly, not weakly, humanly. He still carried power with quiet authority, still spoke carefully, still intimidated half the room without effort. But whenever Elena entered his sight, something gentler appeared in his eyes, and everyone noticed, especially Elena. Some evenings they escaped crowded gatherings entirely, riding through snowy countryside in silence beside flickering carriage lanterns. Those became her favorite moments. No politics, no expectations, just honesty. One such evening, Adrian wrapped a blanket carefully around her shoulders as snow fell outside the carriage windows. You still worry I am cold, she murmured softly. I shall worry about you for the remainder of my life. Tenderness in his voice made her smile. Months earlier she would have hidden that smile carefully. Now she allowed him to see it. Adrian watched her quietly, then spoke words he once could never have imagined saying aloud. I used to think strength meant enduring loneliness without complaint. Elena rested her head lightly against the carriage wall. And now I think strength is allowing another person to matter enough to hurt you. Emotions settled warmly between them, not dramatic, not desperate, earned. That was what made it beautiful. Adrian never stopped regretting the pain he caused her, but regret no longer controlled him. Instead, it transformed him. He listened more carefully now, loved more openly. Protected her not from scandal alone, but from carrying burdens silently the way she once had for him. And Elena changed too. She no longer loved from a place of sacrifice alone, no longer waited quietly for affection. She spoke honestly now, demanded truth, expected tenderness. And Adrian gave it willingly. One snowy night near Christmas, they returned to the Veterans Hospital together carrying books and winter supplies. The soldiers greeted Elena warmly as always. But this time, Adrian watched her among them, not with distant admiration, but with profound emotional devotion. Captain Henry eventually chuckled softly beside him. You look at her as though she saved your life. Adrian's gaze remained fixed gently on Elena. She did. Across the room, Elena glanced toward him, their eyes met. And in that small silent moment, years of pain, longing, regret, and healing settled into something steady and enduring, not perfect, not untouched by scars, but real. Later that evening, after snow began falling heavily outside, Adrian and Elena stood alone beneath the hospital entrance lantern. The world around them felt hushed and silver beneath winter skis. Adrian reached into his coat slowly, then placed a small velvet box into her gloved hands. Elena's breath caught immediately. Inside rested a delicate ring, simple, elegant, and beside it, her mother's wedding ring, carefully restored. Tears filled her eyes instantly. How I searched half the country for it. Voice softened. I could not undo what you sacrificed for me, but I wished to return part of it to you. Emotion overwhelmed her completely. Adrian gently touched her cheek. No hesitation now, no fear. I cannot promise a life without hardship, he whispered. But I swear you will never again face humiliation alone while I stand beside you. Snow drifted quietly around them. Elena looked into the eyes of the man she once thought incapable of emotional surrender, and finally saw home there, not perfection, not fantasy, just love made honest through suffering. Slowly she slipped her hand into his. I think, she whispered tearfully, you were worth waiting for after all. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, as though the words healed something long wounded inside him. Then he kissed her forehead softly beneath the falling snow, while warm lantern light flickered around them. and for the first time in many years neither of them felt lonely anymore.